כל המציל נפש אחת כאילו הציל עולם ומלואו. כל המציל נפש אחת.
Greetings one and all. Super Sundays. Wow, haven't said that Super Sunday in a while. Yes, we are on the 4th day of the holy month of Shvat 5784 from the Holy Land, coming to you from the holy city Elon Moreshchem, my house. Yes, welcome back. Okay. First, as always, this class is for the sake of heaven, to improve ourselves, even one step, one little step, small step for mankind, big step for us, and to remove the divine presence from the exile. And want to take this opportunity to once again thank the sponsor of our channel, Mike, 3 months plus down south, doing amazing things with his team, with his search dogs down in the holy city of Gaza. Mike, a lot of thumbs up, big hugs towards you. Also to our great blog site, Tomer Devora, who puts out these classes when they come out, and highly advise the greatest blog in the world. Check it out, become a lot smarter. Of course, to our cameraman, he's already experienced, Elchanan Gilboa from the holy city of Elon More, learning in for a free Shabbat, coming in from Kiryat Arba, Hebron, and once again, this class to great heroes out there, fighting in the north and fighting in the south, and our condolences to families that have lost dear ones, families that are without their husbands because they're in the battles. So to all of the Jewish people, family of the hostages themselves, thinking about them, embracing them from here. Okay, so with that, a lot said there. Let's go. Today, our class is going to be Free the Hostages Now. Oh, the hashtag, can't forget that. Question mark, exclamation point. Oh yes, both of them are important. Question mark and then exclamation point. Okay, this is really part 2 of the Bring Them Home Now class that we did a week ago. So, but we're calling it a different name. If you didn't have a chance to see the first one, try to get to the first class, Bring Them Home Now class. We spoke about how in the Tanakh, how we dealt with hostages in the Tanakh, how we dealt with them. We spoke about some modern day complications with releasing the hostages for terrorists, and today we're going to take it to the limit. We're going to take it to the end. Very, very important class. You're going to have to put on your thinking cap a little bit. When we get to the middle of the class, it's going to be to understand from the Torah point of view, from the Jewish law point of view, how to look at the hostage issue. I know people today, they like, 1 or 2 minutes or 20 minutes, but really in order to to take on a question, a real solid question, and to be truthful about it, to look at it from all angles, you need time. So take a deep breath, have a seat, bring a cup of tea, and we're off. Okay. So after we saw the Tanakh, we're going to get more modern day here. Responses, different responses, historical responses that we saw, we have seen to kidnapping. So we're going to take it from the year 1240, roughly 800 years ago. Rabbi Meir ben Baruch from Rottenburg, the leading rabbi of his generation. In his time, I think it was in 1242, for 2 straight days in Paris, the Talmud books were burned in their thousands. For 48 straight hours in Paris, they were burned. Unfortunately, it's sad to know that how it came to that was that a Jewish apostate came to the Pope at that time, and he complained about the Talmud. And once again, many times throughout history, our worst enemies have been from within. So that's interesting to take note. Okay, so a little bit about the kidnapping of Rabbi Meir from Rottenburg. Just how great was he? The Marshal, the commentary of the Marshal said that there is no one in the later generations, once again we're going back here, 800 years, there's nobody in our times as great as he is, as he was. There were decrees beginning in Europe where Rabbi Meir lived against the Jews. Many Jews began to escape, though the Gentiles had made it illegal to leave the area. So the punishment was extremely harsh. If you were caught escaping from the area in Europe, you were in hot water. So it was a very dangerous matter. Anyways, some even ran away to the land of Israel. There's a famous author of the Tosfot, Rabbi Yechiel of Paris. He made it, because of this decree, he made it all the way to the land of Israel. So we're now in 1286. Rabbi Meir takes his family and they escape from Rottenburg, and they were coming close to the border, and they were ready to successfully cross over. Unfortunately, a few of the community members that left with Rabbi Meir asked if they could wait for a day or two, because there were other members of the community that wanted to join in with Rabbi Meir in this escape. So they waited a day or two, and that, unfortunately, Rabbi Meir was spotted by an apostate Jew who, in turn, turned him in to the authorities, and he was arrested and he was put in jail. In the meantime, there were 12 community members, very influential community members of Rottenburg that had come, and they were negotiating how could we release Rabbi Meir from this captivity. So the government said that in exchange for 20,000 marks, that's like, it was definitely, it was a exaggerated, exorbitant amount of money that was asked, 20,000 marks. But the Jewish community raised that money, and Rabbi Meir refused to accept the money and to be released. He said, if the Gentiles see that the Jewish people are willing to pay such ransoms, that will incite them to continue and to increase the amount of kidnappings. So Rabbi Meir refused. The money was there, 20,000 marks. Not easy sum to raise, but they did raise it. And he was in prison for 7 years. He passed away in prison. It took another 7 years till they agreed to release his body, also for the same price. They did not take, there was no discount here. The fact that Rabbi Meir was no longer alive, it was just his body. No discounts for the Jews. So a person named Alexander from the Jewish community donated that money, and eventually Rabbi Meir's body was buried. So that was an amazing, his name was Alexander Ziskin, paid all the sum. So we see clearly 800 years ago, a kidnapping, as we mentioned in the first class last week, this was common, especially against the Jewish people, because of the tremendous amount of mercy and the gigantic heart of the Jewish people. They knew that they could take advantage of us. So that was the case of Rabbi Meir. Moving up in time, 200 years ago, in 1820, in the land of Israel, there was a group of 70 new immigrants that came to the land of Israel. They docked at the port in Jaffa, in Yaffo, and when they got off the boats, they were kidnapped by a group of Bedouin Arabs. A big group of Bedouin Arabs kidnapped 70 Jews at the port in Jaffa. And they asked for 1,000 gold Napoleons in order to redeem these 70 Jews, which was also, once again, we're talking about humongous amounts of money that we're dealing with, exorbitant amount of money. Anyways, the Jewish community said, okay, but at this time, 200 years ago, there was an amazing group. They were called, not many Jews know about this, but there were tremendous righteous Jews that created a type of, you could call it a Jewish Defense League of its time. They were Haredi, religious Jews that formed a group called the Gevardia, and their purpose was to defend the Jewish people in the land of Israel. We're talking about 200 years ago. So 2 members of the Jewish community came with the money in various sacks, but behind the scenes, the same time coming down to the city of Jaffa, were these militant religious Jews who were hiding out. And as soon as the money was about to be transferred from the Jews to these Bedouin Arabs, all of a sudden from the hills came this Jewish militant group called Gevardia. And there was a big battle that erupted. And in fact, some of the Bedouin Arabs, thank God, were also killed in this battle. And that halted for good kidnapping of Jews. Amazing. So once again, we have tremendous heroes out there. We have Rabbi Meir ben Baruch, the son of Baruch from Rothenburg, who refused for 7 years to receive money to be redeemed. He did not want to incite other, whet the appetite of other Gentiles to think that they could get away with this kidnapping. And then we have 200 years ago the Gavardia that did battle against kidnappers of 70 Jews. Okay, moving along, we're now in 1970. In 1970, one day, there were supposed to be 3 hijackings by various Arab terrorist groups. 3. 2 of them succeeded, 1 of them did not. One of them that succeeded was a 1970 hijack of Sabina Airlines. It was a flight from Frankfurt, Germany to the US, which means this Sabina flight originated in the land of Israel and made its way to Frankfurt, and from Frankfurt it was supposed to go to the United States. There it was hijacked. On the plane, there was a large group of Jews on that plane, including one of the great sages of America, Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner, and his family. For 3 weeks, this plane was hijacked in Germany, and it was taken to Jordan. And somewhere in the desert, in an unpopulated area of Jordan, it was landed, emergency landing there. And that is where the hijackers landed the plane. For 3 weeks, the captives remained in the plane. And after 3 weeks, right before Rosh Hashanah, a couple days before Rosh Hashanah, the Jordanian forces moved in, and they succeeded in freeing all of the hostages and killing the terrorists, thank God. So once again, an amazing story of how to deal with these terrorists, kidnappers. That's our 3rd offering. Number 4, 6 years later, in 1976, in July, I think it was July 4th, an Air France airplane was hijacked, and on board of this Air France, there were 98 Jews aboard this flight. And the flight was hijacked in Entebbe in Uganda. The famous Entebbe battle over there. A little bit background information on that, what was going on. So once again, we're talking about 1976, we're talking about 48 years ago, a long time ago. In the summer of 1976, July 4th, an Air France plane from Israel to France was hijacked. 98 Jews were aboard the flight. The terrorists demanded the release of 40 prisoners, 40 terrorists, to be released, or the hostages would be killed. Now, there is a dispute amongst reporters, historians. Listen to the dispute. The dispute was that, according to a certain opinion, the prime minister then of Israel in 1976, his name was Yitzhak Rabin, and there is a school that claims that the prime minister turned to Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, the leading Sephardic rabbi of Israel. They turned to him and asked, what is the Jewish law in such a circumstance? Should we capitulate? Should we fight? There is another opinion that it wasn't the prime minister that turned to Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. It was many, many families of the hostages that turned to Rabbi Ovadia Yosef and asked for his suggestion what to do. So those are the two opinions. Anyways, Rabbi Ovadia turned to some of the Torah scholars of that period of time, 46 years ago. One was Rabbi Eliashiv, another one was Rabbi Shaul Yisraeli, Rabbi Ben Sion Abba Shaul, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Rabbi Eliezer Goldschmidt, and Rabbi Jolti. Most of the rabbis opted that it was permissible to give in to the demands of the hostages and release 40 terrorists for the 98 Jews that were captured. It is interesting to note in this Entebbe, according to most opinion, if you ask people, what was the position of Israel in 1976 as far as terrorists? Most people will tell you, and people will even tell you today, that Israel's position is not negotiating with terror. Maybe not today, but Israel's position was not negotiating with terrorists. So let me just tell you, very interesting. In this 1976 Entebbe hijack, the government of Israel was prepared to give in to the demands of the terrorists and release 40 more terrorists. They were willing. In fact, they were not only willing on paper, it was already brought into motion. There were various dignitaries of Israel that were sent out to start putting this in motion, even though Israel likes to present itself, or at least then, as we do not negotiate with terrorists. Anyways, that's just a side issue. A last-minute military effort and program battle plan was put into motion, and it proved both the rabbis, not all rabbis, because some of the rabbis were against the deal. Most of them were for it, but it proved both sides. The government of Israel and also the rabbis proved both sides incorrect. And it was a tremendous, tremendous sanctification of God's name. And the Jews suffered, I think, it was 2 casualties. But it was a tremendous sanctification of God's name, and it was definitely a message to the world that don't mess with the Jewish people, don't mess with us in Israel. Okay, so now, with that said, we will now go into, you got to put on your thinking caps. We're going to go into the Jewish law aspect of this. Now, I sat on this, the religious aspect here, sat on it for a month. Day in and day out, I sat on this, and I did my best to summarize it, because it's really vast, the information out here. So, if you follow it, listen to it again a couple of times. It is not, okay, I'm making it as simple as possible, okay? So you got a break here. You didn't have to break your teeth, and you got a break for me. I was the one that broke my teeth for it. So we'll take it step by step. Listen closely. We're going to go step by step here. Many times, recently, we hear people throwing out things, but it's very superficial. People talk for 10 minutes, and we're going to go we're going to go deep to the issue. And once again, everything is summarized. So I'm keeping it as short as I can. We begin with the Mishnah in Gittin, page 45, side 8. One is not allowed to free hostages more than their worth. We'll see in a minute or so. What does that mean? More than a person's worth. Why was this decree of not redeeming prisoners? As we mentioned in the first class last week, this became a tremendous phenomena in the world of capturing Jews. There was a need for our sages to make a decree to limit the amount, the ransom that we would be willing to pay for the release of hostages, because it was getting out of control. So the Mishnah tells us you're not allowed to redeem somebody more than their worth in order to maintain world stability, that it doesn't become out of control phenomena of kidnapping Jews. So there was a need to put, so to speak, our foot down. What was the reason behind this legislation? There are two opinions in the Talmud. One opinion is to not place a financial burden on the public. If every week or so, every other week, Jews are being kidnapped and the ransom money has to be raised by communities, this is a tremendous financial burden. You can't, person can't survive. So in order to get a message out to the world that we are not paying extravagant amounts of money to free Jews, in order not to encourage further kidnapping. So that's number one, not to place a financial burden on the public. Number two, second opinion. Just before we go to second opinion, we have to understand in the times that we're talking about of the Talmud, people were kidnapped to either become slaves or to be perhaps put to death. So the only way to get out of that situation was to pay a ransom. So that would free a person and they wouldn't become a slave or free from death. Our second opinion is that it has nothing to do with money. We are not allowed to capitulate to kidnappers because that will just encourage them to continue kidnapping Jews. So therefore, we do not free people, Jews, more than their worth. This appears also in Gittin 45a. What is the difference? Step number 3. What is the difference between the first reason why this was enacted? Money. We didn't want to become a financial burden on the Jewish people, or we did not want to encourage further kidnapping. What's the difference? Very simply. Let's say a person was kidnapped and he has a wealthy relative. So it's not a burden on the relative to pay. So that would be okay because it's not a burden on the community. It's a burden on an individual or a friend. However, even in that case, it doesn't interest us. According to the second opinion, we do not want to encourage kidnapping. So therefore, we're not interested if you have a rich relative, because if the rich relative is going to go out there and pay money, so that will encourage kidnappers to continue what they're doing. So therefore, there's a big difference which opinion we accept. Is it because of a financial burden, or is it because of encouraging more possible kidnappings? Now, step number 4. The conclusion of this dispute, according to most Rishonim, the earlier Jewish law commentators, is the major reason why this decree came out of our sages was due to the fact we did not want to encourage kidnapping, further kidnappings. So therefore, that's why there was this enactment. Now, we said in the Mishnah, it says we're not allowed to redeem a person beyond their worth. What does that mean? So according to the Meiri in his book Beit HaBechira on Tractate Ketubot, page 2, side B, every person is a different story, which means that we can't give one general thumb of rule, because everything goes according to a person's intellectual capabilities, their skills, their intelligence, what occupation they have. Everybody is different. According to the Radbaz, he has two opinions. What does it mean we're not allowed to redeem a person that's been captured more than their worth? So according to the Radbaz, one opinion of his is you have to take in the world, wherever there's a slave trade, today there are millions of people still enslaved in the world, and you have to look at what the going rate for slaves is in the world at the time, and that would be the going rate. Another opinion by the same Radbaz is no. You have to look around what's going on within the nations of the world. What is acceptable practice within the nations of the world? You look out in Europe, you look out in America, wherever it might have been in history, and according to what the Gentiles are giving for members of their communities or their cities that are being kidnapped, that is the Jewish yardstick. So I'm just going to give an example of modern day. In September, this past September, five American hostages were released from Iran in exchange for 5 Iranian prisoners in America. So it was 5 for 5. Now, if you remember our last class, we were talking about in 1985, there were 1,150 terrorists released for 3 soldiers. That's unproportionate to what we're talking about here. In America, it's 5 for 5. You know, like, give me 5, high five. In 2011, with Gilad Shalit, it was 1 soldier, 1 Jew, for 1,027 terrorists. So you see, something is way off. Something has gone bananas here in Israel. According to the Radbaz, you look at the world and see what's going down. Another example in America, in May 2014, Sergeant, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Bo Bergdel was released from a Taliban prison in exchange for 5 Taliban prisoners. So once again, 1 for 5, not 1 for 1,000 or so. Okay. Next, step number 5. So that's considered to be, we have a various scales. What does it mean beyond their worth? Either individual, everyone depending on their skills, occupation. We talked about whatever the slave market in the world is at that time, or it goes according to what's going on in the world at the present moment. Are there exceptions to this decree? The Talmud seems to be saying flat out, or does it, that one is not allowed to exaggerate when it comes to freeing captives. We're not allowed to exaggerate in order not to encourage other countries, other individual terrorists to continue kidnapping Jews and taking them hostages. Are there exceptions to this decree? Yes, there are exceptions. Number one, according to the Code of Jewish Law, Yoredea 252, Law 4, a person on his or her own volition is allowed to redeem themselves in an exaggerated manner, more than is accustomed in the world. Why is that? Because we have a principle in Judaism that a person's life comes before other people's lives. A person's individual life comes before other people. For example, the Talmud teaches us that if there are two people in a desert and there is enough water for one person, a person has to, and it's his water, so the person whose water it is, he should drink that water because his life takes precedent over somebody else. Chayecha kodmim lechayecha vercha. That's what it says. That is learned out in the tractate of Bava Metzia, page 62, side A. So, once again, an individual can arrange his or her own freedom, even though it's more than the world is accustomed to or the going rate. Second exception to the rule. A scholar, a Torah scholar. We learn this out. This is brought down in Jewish law, in the Code of Jewish Law, Yoredea 252, also law number 4. There's not that many. There are not that many Jewish scholars, and they don't come a dime a dozen. So we are allowed to exaggerate in order to save Jewish Torah scholars. We said earlier this evening, we talked about Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner, that he had some well-to-do students who were able to gather up the money that was being demanded by the terrorists. And we'll see later on that it was we'll see later on that the reason why this was allowed to take place, why were these religious people agreeing to exaggerated demands of terrorists in 1970 to free Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner? The reason is because according to halacha, you are allowed to exaggerate, and that's why they went, a few well-to-do people, and they were gathering up. They succeeded in raising the funds that were necessary. It never came to that because they were attacked, thank God, by the Jordanian forces and murdered. And killed, excuse me. A third exception to the rule is a person's wife. There are two reasons for this. Number one, in Torah terms, Torah terminology, a wife and a husband are considered to be one. So just like the Jewish law allows an individual to free themselves even at an exaggerated price, same is true if my wife, God forbid, is kidnapped. I'm allowed to exaggerate because it's as if I'm redeeming myself. That's an amazing concept. The beauty of marriage, they're considered to be one. Another explanation by our sages is the reason why a person can redeem his wife for an exaggerated amount is because of the fact that when when a man gets married, there are many obligations that a man, when a man gets married and he signs a marriage agreement with his wife. So there are many obligations on the male. There are certain obligations on the female, but there are more obligations on a male side, what he has to do. And one of them is to free his wife, which means that we look at his wife as the money that was agreed to when they were married. That is her money. So she is freeing herself. It's not like the husband is freeing her. She's freeing herself because that money which was promised to her if she was kidnapped, that belongs to her. So it's her money. If it's her money, it's like any other individual that are freeing themselves. So we have two reasons why a wife could be redeemed. Either a husband and wife are considered to be one, and therefore she could redeem herself, because it's not the husband, it's a husband and wife are one, so they're allowed to, they're considered to be one, and an individual can redeem themselves, or it's her money in the marriage agreement called the ketubah. Okay. Our last point here for this evening, and we'll take it again, God willing, next week. What is the law when a hostage's life is in danger? Once again, in the world, there was this commonplace phenomena of people kidnapping others throughout the ages. We said even in the 10 Commandments, there's a commandment you're not allowed to kidnap people. We see in the Torah, we see early on, Sarah was kidnapped twice, one by the king of Egypt and one by the king of the Philistines. So in many times, it was just a business. That's how people made money, etc. They would kidnap people. And that's how they made their money. But there was never, it wasn't common that there was a danger to their life. They would be enslaved, yes, but there wasn't a danger to their lives. So what happens when there is a danger to a captive's life? Does that change the decree? Once again, the decree says you are not allowed to exaggerate when it comes to freeing hostages, because this will encourage others to continue the kidnapping phenomena. Okay. According to most of the Rishonim, most of the early sages, the decree took into account that we are not allowed to free hostages, even in a situation, exaggerate in freeing hostages, even if there is a danger to the captive's life. Because once again, this will encourage many other people to be kidnapped and killed. So if we start capitulating, then it will become out of control. This is brought down by, for example, a partialist, Maharam Milublin, in his Questions and Answers, the book Perach Mate Aaron, Knesset Yecheskel, Yad Eliyahu, Ben Avraham, Sharei De'ah, Question and Answers, Beit Yaakov, the Ramban, Nachmanides, and Maimonides all agree. Now, listen closely. Even though the majority of the early sages, the Rishonim, say that this does not change the decree not to exaggerate when it comes to freeing hostages, does not change because the captives are in danger. Their lives are in danger. However, there are still a minority of opinion that their opinion is when there is a danger to the hostage's life, this decree does not cover that type of situation. In that type of situation where there is a danger, then you can exaggerate in order to save the captives' lives. You could excessively pay a price. This is brought down in one of the commentators of the Code of Jewish Law by the Shach, and the Pitchei Tshuva brings down a few opinions that go according to this. So once again, there is a window here. Listen closely. Even though the majority of opinions say that if there's a danger to the life of the captives, it does not change the law. You are not allowed to go beyond the accepted procedure of freeing hostages. There is a minority opinion. And once there's a minority opinion, you open a window for such an opinion. As time goes on, we will see, next class, we will see as time progresses, we will see that there are opinions, because of this minority of opinion, that once there's a danger to captives' lives, that changes the whole game around, and we are allowed to exaggerate in the ransom. So this allows possibilities to perhaps free the hostages, even in an exaggerated manner, even though it's not the majority of opinion. Okay, so for now, we're going to hold right there. And next week, for our conclusion, don't forget, come back. Don't touch that dial till next week.